Hey guys, what's going on? I'm Malecki, and in this video, I'm gonna show you how I made this reclaimed wood beam mantle with hidden storage. Check it out. This thing's monstrous. Let's cut it down a little bit before we get started. Haha! All right, so after getting this thing cut down, doing some rough measurements, we're gonna use this as the front. It's got the best saw marks on it, so I'm gonna rip the beam down to 6x6 or as close to that as I can get. So after getting a better look at the beam, I decided to scrap keeping the saw marks, and I actually ripped this thing down and smoothed out all the faces. It still has some really cool character because it's reclaimed, but as you can see here, there's no more of the saw marks left, so I actually ended up just removing those with the joiner. Now I'm cutting down the beam to its final dimensions, or close to it. Here I cut off 2 chunks from each end, and one of them actually fell apart, so I'm gluing it back together, and I'm cleaning up all of the rough faces. I'm going to use epoxy in order to fill all of the voids, and for that I'm making some forms. I'm laying down some packing tape in order for the epoxy to not stick to the form, and then I just essentially glue up a box using hot glue and some brad nails. This should keep everything pretty tight inside of the box. There was a little bit of leakage, but I was able to fill it from the outside with some hot glue, and it worked out pretty well. It's the first time I've done something like this, and it's the first time I've used a pour this deep. I typically only use surface epoxy or epoxy in small voids, and I do it in some small layers. For this, I thought I would push the epoxy to its limits, and for this build, I'm actually using Total Boat epoxy, and I'll have a link in the description for that. And I tint it black, as you can see there, before I pour it. And then I just make sure I pour it in all the voids, and I hit it with a little bit of MAP gas in order to release any bubbles. So if I get the parts out of the form, I move on to using my joiner to take an extremely thin cut on one of the faces before I run it through the planer. And I do that right around 1/32 of an inch. I do it for both the flat board as well as that one chunk. Now be very, very careful if you're going to use the joiner for that small chunky part, because it is dangerous and you can definitely get some kickback. So now that we've got the top and the back cut, everything's planed up and nice and square, I'm gonna put it all back together so it looks seamless. I'm gonna match the grain here with the grain on the top, and then I'm gonna put the front on. So top first with the side caps, and then the front. I then glue this up in parts. I glue the outside chunks first, and I match the grain to the best of my ability. And while that's setting, I go ahead and cut the parts for what's going to be the lid or the box or the fold down aspect of this build, whatever you want to call it. And I just use the same reclaimed wood. Now I would love to have used the same grain pattern, but because this is a reclaimed beam, it just wasn't possible. I then get everything out of the clamps. I take the flattened front and I match the grain as well. All right, we've got everything out of the clamps now. You can see that I left the front a little bit proud. That way I could bring it all down to size, make sure that it's perfect. And I'm gonna do that with a hand plane. I do want this to still look like a beam, but hopefully this reveals a nice, pretty grain match from where I resawed it. I'm a liar, we're gonna trim this with the router. That was messy. I smooth up everything with a hand plane. As you can see there, it was a pretty awesome grain match. And then I cut the ends to size. I use a hand saw at first and then realize I still have this gigantic circular saw. I want to create some mounting blocks, so I go ahead and rip down one last part for the where the gun's going to be going, and then make these little plates here that are going to mount to where all the hinges and all of the hardware is going to be.
Now that we got the door working, I got some stops inside. I just pinned those in there. It's working pretty nicely. Now I'm going to install this little child-proof lock that uses a magnet. When you put the magnet on the end, it pulls it in. So the concept is you hide the magnet, and when you need it, you know where to put it. Boom, latch opens, and you're good to go. So let's give this a try.
With the latch in, I go ahead and just lay out the gun where it's going to be sitting, and I just use some Velcro that I get at the craft store.
Got it mocked up here on an empty wall in the shop. Fingers crossed, let's give it a try. Oh yeah! Boom! Now that everything's sanded and laid out, I want to add somewhere where I can keep some shells. So I'm going to route a little groove and just use the same kind of Velcro technique to keep them in there.
With everything all wrapped up, I go ahead and sand it to 220 grit, and then I apply a hand rub finish. So once I have it all finished up, I go ahead and head to my house. Now this is my fireplace where I mark out the mounting points for a block, as you see there, and then I just essentially screw it in with some Tapcons and I mount the beam right to it.
So thank you guys so much for checking out this build. If you want to see another one of my gun builds, I got it queued up for you right here. Also want to thank my sponsor for this build, Timberland Pro. If you want to see more from them, hit that link down in the description. Lastly, thank you guys one more time for tuning in. Go punch your next project in the face, and I'll see you in the next video.